So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the June session, Association Exchange. This session is worth 1 CAE, so make sure you track it and submit it to ASAE. We have a really interesting program today. My name is Sherry Singer. I'm president of Singer Communication, and we help associations solve their marketing, public relations, and communication challenges. Today, we have a really interesting topic called the diversity lens. And I want to thank Marcia Howard, Dr. Howard, who has set this up for us. She's one of our AXC planning committee members. And Marcia is the vice president for regulatory and scientific affairs at CHPA. She's had a 20-year career in association management. She's an innovator at heart, and a fun fact is that she just returned from Detroit, Michigan last week, where she was part of the DELP reunion, ASA's DELP reunion. And now I want to introduce Steve Jones, who's the CEO of pocstock. Steve is an award-winning entrepreneur. He has 20 years of experience in technology, marketing, and branding, and he founded pocstock in 2019. And a fun fact about Steve is he just returned from Cannes, France last week. Ooh la la. So we're really happy to have both Steve and Marcia with us. And with that introduction, I do want to tell you that this particular session, we are going to ask people to put questions as they arise into the chat. And also, I want to remind people that we will not be holding a program in July or August. We're off for our summer break, but we will be back in September. So look for us then. I'm going to turn it now over to Marcia and Steve. Have a great session. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Sherry. Thank you to everyone for attending today. And thank you to Steve for taking time from his schedule to actually present to us today. And I'm sure before 2020, but definitely after the summer of 2020, DE&I has been on the radar for pretty much everyone in the association space in corporate America. And today, Steve will be teaching us how to have authentic engagement in our DE&I efforts and our programs, and not just looking around for different photos and images to use in our promotional materials. And Steve is the perfect person to help us identify how to do this correctly based on his experience in the industry, as well as being the founder and CEO of pocstock. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation, and I'm hoping that at the end of it, you will begin to see things through the diversity lens. So a little bit about me. I spent the past 25 years in and around marketing, advertising, media, content, branding, and technology. I used to run an award-winning digital agency for 15 years, and I learned a lot about how to communicate to different audiences by working with a lot of global brands, and discovered an issue with the lack of diversity in the content and media space. And that was the impetus to form pocstock along with my co-founder, Deshaun Brown. We developed the diversity lens to work with brands, agencies, associations, organizations of all sizes, production teams of all sizes and types, to really sort of train people, sort of give them a few tools to think about how to be more inclusive. And what we found is that when you take a different view of what inclusivity is, what diversity is, what equity is, you start to see that it's not this separate thing that you need to go to work and do, but most people are already thinking about diversity, thinking about inclusion, and thinking about equity in different parts of their lives. There's just this mental sort of break that people have between diversity in content and diversity in the rest of their lives. So this kind of helps you to create a more holistic view of what that means. So today this is just a primer. This is part of a more expansive program that we worked intimately with teams to do an assessment of where they are and kind of help them move forward from wherever they are in their journey to becoming a more inclusive organization. So I'm going to give you a quick little intro of what the program is, and then we're going to talk about diversity in stock imagery and also how to be more inclusive in your production of your content and your communications. And then I'm going to give you a few quick action steps on things that you can do to, sort of maintain your inclusive programming. So it's just not a reaction to something happening or a one-off. It just becomes a part of how you think about your communications. So most of us have heard the words diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and DE&I has become this polarizing, terminology. And, it can be overwhelming and tiring and confusing depending on who you're talking to. But when we work closely with teams, we bring it down to a practical level. And I'm a father of 5. And most of what I think about when I think about diversity, equity, inclusion, I think about my children, right? I think about, for instance, and just to give you a practical example of how you can think about it, and most of you are already diversity champions without even knowing it, right? So for instance, if your child wanted to have pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, as a good parent, is that something you would encourage? Most people would say, no, I would want them to try different things. I would want to expose them to different foods, different meals, so they can get out of it different things, different nutrients, different experiences. It broadens their minds as young people. And also having a balanced diet is good for any human being and our development. The same thing with content and media, having diverse sources of content, having diverse voices around you helps you to become a more whole human being, right? None of us are ever going to get it all, but if you take bites and pieces of different little sources of information and you include that in your communication, as you learn more about different types of people, especially the people who are not always around you, you become a more whole human being, and that allows you to communicate more effectively and build relationships with different types of people. Now, if you take the same example and your children are at home, and it's dinner time and you prepared the meal and you have 3 children, they all sit down and you only, put food out for 2 and you don't include the 3rd one. How would that 3rd child feel if they were left out of the conversation? How would that 3rd child then start to look at you? And how would the other children look at that 3rd child if they're consistently not included in the meal? And that's really how, when we apply inclusion, we think about how many people are we allowing at the table to have a voice, to have a presence in our marketing materials, in our communications, in the same way that you would not have 3 children and not feed one of them, right? So everyone's audiences are generally based and built around different people, different types of people. It may break down by gender, it may break down by race, by geography, by socioeconomic status. There's a way to look at the people that you're looking to communicate with, whether they're employees, whether they're business leaders around you, what have you in your own personal and business life. Those people around you, you want to make sure that you're allowing them to have a seat at your table and a voice in your storytelling. Equity, I think of a little differently. Let's say we look at the ages of those 3 children that are sitting at the table. Equity can be translated as fairness, how you treat people, but it also can be translated of how you create equitable outcomes by giving people specifically what they need to succeed or for you to accomplish your goals. So imagine that one of your 3 children is a toddler, one of them is a teenager, and the other is a young adult. And the teenager just came home from soccer practice, and they had a great game, and the coach treated them all to pizza. So that teenager came home with a full belly. Would you, as a parent, then put down in front of them 3 plates, equal portions of the same meal? Most people would say no. I feed my toddler, if it or pre-toddler, I maybe give them a bottle or a food that's been processed a certain way. If my teen had already eaten, I wouldn't feed him again. I may offer him a drink or dessert, and I would give a full plate of food to my young adult. I would give each of them what they needed in order for them to be fully satisfied. And when I look at equity, and we look at equity at pocstock, that's how we look at it. What do we need to provide people in the conversations, in the storytelling, in the process, to make sure that each person gets what they specifically need? Equity is very different than equality. Equality is giving everyone the same thing. Equity is giving people what they specifically need. Most of us have seen an image that looks like this, right? It's the, I don't want to date myself, but it's the Benetton ad approach of diversity. And it's usually at a point in your relationship with diverse populations where you start with the image like this, and it's fine if this is where you are in your journey. But this is usually a signal for us when we see people communicating this way, that they're at the beginning of their journey. They have not developed a comfortable relationship with diverse populations as of yet. And this is how they approach inclusion. Once you develop a relationship, a communication pattern, a form of engagement with diverse populations, these sorts of images will make you cringe, because you'll realize that this, by including everyone, you're not including really anyone. Like this is more of a performative sort of image, and everyone has to start somewhere. But then once you recognize that these types of imagery that sort of look like this don't really speak to what you think it's speaking to. This doesn't speak to diversity. This speaks of from the receiving end of it, this speaks to folks recognize they see us, which is great. Someone recognizes that we exist, which is great, but they don't yet know how to communicate to me, right? So that there's a gap there that needs to now be spoken to and filled. And at pocstock, we look at various diverse groups around the world and in the US as well. And then we break them down into major buckets. And then those buckets, we then look at intersectionality between those lifestyles of those various groups. So primarily Black, Asian, Hispanic, Native Americans, LGBTQIA+, people over 50, persons with disabilities, as well as Middle Eastern people. These are different groups that we work with our clients on how best to communicate with. These are large images. These are large libraries on our platform at pocstock.com. We spend time curating these images. We learn a lot about the cultures, the nuances around these specific groups. So when you go and look for a person from Hispanic background, you will know whether they are Cuban, whether they're Puerto Rican, whether they're Mexican, and that will inform how you can communicate to them. And one of the things we look at when we're looking at these groups, we look at where they're located in the world. And where you're located in the world, there's always a group that has a dominant narrative. That's usually the folks who control the majority of the messaging. And then there's everyone else who are, not necessarily fighting, but trying to get attention to the things that they care about. So in the US, the dominant narrative is usually controlled by the dominant population, which is 58% white, 19% Hispanic, 13% Black, and 7% Asian. And that is usually one of the lenses that we look at content through here in the US is, what are the stories that the dominant narrative or the dominant group, the majority population, is telling about different perspectives. Like, it's fantastic that, we hear stories from everyone's perspective, but then you have to think, if there's a dominant narrative from the majority, where are the other voices that are not being heard? How do we seek those voices out to elevate them so everyone is heard, everyone is seen, everyone is valued? If you pan out globally, like we usually do, because a lot of the brands we work with are global brands, you then start to see that, yes, in the US, the dominant majority is 58% white, but 8% globally is what they represent. So then we have to look at the regions that we're communicating within and what are the dominant narratives of those regions, right? So if you go to certain countries in Asia Pacific, for instance, the dominant narrative may be controlled by the government. You pan out to the Middle East and other places across Africa, it may be controlled by religion. You go certain places across Europe and then it's about class, it's about different levels of access. They control what is said, what is popular, what is known as fact, where all the stereotypes come from, where all the perceptions come from, and then that informs how we can communicate to people, right? So we know where the dominant voices are, who's missing from the conversation, who's telling the most of the story that we all consume, and then we have to challenge it. I was talking to someone the other day about the Hispanic population in the US and how rapidly it's growing. And if you wanted to do a targeted campaign to Hispanic people in the US today, it's practically, I wouldn't say impossible because nothing is possible, but it would be very nuanced in terms of how you communicate to Hispanics today, right? Because if you're communicating to Hispanics and they reside in, let's say, California, Texas, in that region, from Texas, New Mexico, California, where Hispanics are the dominant majority in those regions, they're mostly Mexican. If you pan out to the East Coast where I live, you go to New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the Hispanics in those regions are mostly Puerto Rican or Dominican. You go down south to Florida, the Hispanics in that region are mostly Cuban. And they're all different. They share common cultural, background, but individually, those groups are very different in terms of their beliefs, in terms of their political beliefs, in terms of the foods, the music, the iconography that's associated with those groups. And you have to sort of think about it from a perspective of, who am I targeting? Who do I want to communicate to? How do I effectively communicate to them? And when it comes to visual imagery, if you do a Hispanic campaign in New York, and you have someone with a sombrero and maracas, you're going to be very much off base, right? Because all Hispanics are not the same, all Black people are not the same, all white people are not the same, where none of us as human beings are monoliths. No group is a monolith. So it's very important that we start to learn a little bit more about the diversity within each of these groups. Between Black, Hispanic, and Asian, we represent $4 trillion a year in spending, and a lot of brands and marketers are recognizing that diversity and DE&I is not something that should be this afterthought. If you're as a practical matter, if you're a business person and you're looking to grow your business, grow your communication, grow your audience, why would you ignore a group that spends $4 trillion a year? That's the fourth largest economy in the world if people of color in the US were a country. Why would you not want to tap into that and build a relationship with that group, right? Most businesses do, and that's why you hear so much about D&I, because they recognize that there's value, not just performance value, but economic value in building relationships. So how do you build those relationships is the challenge of the century, right? So everyone is trying to figure out how to build relationships with diverse populations when there's so much sensitivity around getting it wrong, right? And rightfully so. Things that we talk about when we look at imagery, and I'm going to keep this mostly focused on imagery today, but how are you choosing your imagery? How are you being inclusive in your imagery? a lot of when we look at the dominant narrative, we look at who's the hero, who's the main person that's being amplified in the storytelling. And sometimes in order to be more inclusive, you have to choose other heroes, right? So when you think of an image of a CEO, the first image may come to mind may not be someone who looks like me, right? The traditional images may be, you know, a older Caucasian male with a salt and pepper hair and beard in a business suit. And that's the image that we've seen for decades. So that's, most of us are programmed to think that's what a CEO should look like. But nowadays CEOs look, you know, they look like me because, you know, and the imagery that's available in the market doesn't represent that. So who is the hero? Who are you making the hero in your stories? And it's, if you want to build a good relationship with diverse populations, you need to make sure that your campaigns are making more heroes, elevating more people, platforming more people, because when people see themselves in your communications, they think you're talking to them, right? Psychologically, when you see yourselves in imagery, you think they're directly speaking to you. Have people who are relatable in your imagery, right? You know, in this particular image on the screen, you know, it's an older woman with gray hair. She's wearing a, you know, a very casual outfit. If you're producing a shot like this, you know, she's not wearing much jewelry. You know, she's not dressed. She's dressed like she should be outdoors. Like it's all. It looks like someone who may be in your family, or someone who's a coworker, or someone who lives, you know, up the block, or you see at the coffee shop. You know, you have people in your images who look like regular people, right? Everyday people, and be appropriate for the age. If I go back to the Hispanic conversation, you know, they're a large part of, you know, the Hispanic population are you know, younger folks who, you know, and I just learned this one tidbit yesterday, but a lot of younger Hispanics don't speak Spanish. You know, so when you're targeting, you know, when you're thinking about your targeting, make sure you're targeting based on the age demographic and how those people, one, consume information. You know, are they on social media? Do they, are you meeting them at events? Or are you sending out newsletters? Or are they coming to your website? And then how do those people like to receive their information? So when you think about, you know, your imagery, make sure it's age appropriate, like you're matching your age demographic in your imagery. If you're selling an insurance product or a healthcare product, you know, a lot of what people are thinking about is, you know, who am I talking to in my messaging? Who am I talking to visually and written? You know, and I want to make sure my imagery represents that. That's pretty straightforward. But it's been gotten wrong quite a bit. This image.
Can I
Yes.
interrupt you for a second?
Sure, absolutely.
So, you know, in an effort to not offend any group, a lot of times you will see images that are, for lack of a better way to describe them, ambiguous. They can be anything that you want them to be, right?
Right.
Or is that a good way? Because that way we're being inclusive, or is that really not the way to show inclusivity?
I don't, it depends. So if they're really people who look like, you know, there was a term that they used to use in Hollywood and advertising, racially ambiguous. And they created that term just for that reason. They want to show someone who's of a particular ethnic group without it being defined, so they can check the box of, hey, there's some diversity here, without specifically targeting one group over the next. And one of the action steps I have later, I don't want to, you know, jump too far ahead, but it's really about your communication and the relationships that you're building with different groups. You don't need to use racially ambiguous imagery if you're building relationships with these groups, right? You don't have to have everyone in one image if you're consistently communicating and recognizing and valuing these different groups. You know, you can do an image and a campaign for that features a Black person that is not in Black History Month, just throughout the year. You can then feature, you know, someone of a different racial group, a gender, a different look. As long as you're doing that, and that's more what we counsel our clients on, is to include more people all year round and build relationships with those people. Let them know you see them and you have some value for having them in your communication stream. And then you don't have to do those performative things like having racially ambiguous people. Now, there are people out there, you can look at them and, you know, they're mixed race and you'll say, are you Hispanic or are you Middle Eastern? And, you know, those people exist, so they should be included as well. But if you're doing it not for the sake of inclusion, but for the sake of just checking a box, then I would counsel that there is a better way to do it. And the way that we counsel to do it is to solve a problem. You know, pocstock is mission driven, so we're here to solve problems. We're not here to help people perform and look like they're doing something and not actually doing the work. So, but we're also not here to make people feel bad about not being, you know, as, you know, deep into the DE&I space as others. Like, everyone has to start somewhere and then they move to where their new cultural, their new norms would be. So, but yeah, no, I would counsel that there's a better way to do it.
All right, thank
so,
you. You're
yeah,
just
no.
practicing inclusion,
Absolutely.
keeping everyone under the tent.
Absolutely. This particular image is, you know, it's candid. So traditional stock imagery, some of it looks very posed, some of it looks very artificial. This particular image, I chose it because it's candid. It's a moment where it looks like the photographer just happened to be there and capture, you know, a loving father, you know, doing his best to do his daughter's hair. And for me, you know, it would look like a mess if I tried to do my daughter's hair, if she would even let me do it. But you know, this is an image that kind of captures that. So you want images that speak to candid moments, authenticity. It looks like real people doing real things, and that resonates with today's audiences a lot better than the traditional stock images. And you know, one thing we talk about as well is, since we as people of color have not traditionally been able to tell our own stories, there are a lot of you know, misrepresentation of how we are as people and who we are. And you know, we're getting a lot more opportunity these days to tell our own stories. And some of the things we have to actively do is challenge some of the stereotypes that have been out there. And this image was chosen because there's a stereotype that Black fathers are not as engaged with their children as other groups. And the CDC's report shows it's quite the opposite, that Black fathers are actually a lot more engaged in the activities with their children, not necessarily marriage to the baby's mother, which is usually the stat that's used. So this challenging of stereotypes helps to create authentic relationships, so you're not reinforcing harmful imagery that could offend people that you're trying to connect to, and assume that until, you know, after 2020, like you mentioned, where there's been a lot more awareness of the sensitivity around communicating with different groups, some of the information that we've received our whole lives are wrong, or it's a fraction of the information that's been made to be presented as a whole. So now there's a lot of movement towards, you know, correcting some of those things and making sure that images that are provided to people are free of stereotypes, free of harmful and negative connotations and things like that. One of the things about this image is that what makes it look authentic is that if you were really a Black father doing your daughter's hair, you know, the little bottle and some of the artifacts in the background help to make this look like it's a real image. And oftentimes, some of our clients and even some of our contributors, we have a contributor base of over 800 photographers in over 60 countries, and they all create through their own lens. And sometimes they're doing shoots that don't have the authentic artifacts in them. And an artifact may be, if you're a person, let's say in an urban area, New York, Brooklyn, or somewhere, you go into your apartment, there may be things there. And you can look at it like if you're in watching a period movie, and you look at the outfits, you look at the cars, you look at the food, you look at the dance, you listen to the sounds. Those are artifacts. Those things let you know that there was some thought put into getting this into an authentic and realistic space. Same thing applies to imagery. Make sure the artifacts that are in your imagery reflect as authentically as you can with the scene that you're trying to portray and the people that are in it. I'll talk about that a little bit more, and I won't drill on this one too long, but just make sure you have different types of people that you're including, and that the people are, they don't necessarily need to look like models, and typically how people have been cast. There's beauty in everyone, and if you can find ways to pull that out, that's usually the way to win, because not everyone looks like the Hollywood model. Regular people have things that people traditionally in the past have considered flaws, but now you can wear those flaws and it becomes just who you are. You turn that into a positive. So I touched on this already, so I won't stay too long here, but traditional images are usually someone standing looking at the camera smiling, but you really want to capture images that are more authentic, that look like you're a fly on the wall and you just happen to be there. And those are the images that resonate with people. Not everyone needs to be happy and smiling, and there's a full range of emotions other than happiness that people experience on a daily basis, that when people see these other emotions, it makes them feel like, okay, these folks get it. I don't weigh 90 pounds. I cry. I'm sad. I have anxiety. These are things that real people experience, and there isn't an abundance of images that support that. People have work-related stress. We try to find images that reflect that full range of emotions, body types, different ways of expression, expressing yourself, expressing of love, expressions of emotion, things like that. So I wanted to talk really quickly about a project I had the pleasure of working on with CHPA. And Marcia, I'm not sure if you want to.
So probably now about 2 or 3 years ago, we had an idea, and ours was we wanted to capture diverse models that were showing the appropriate way to dose medicines. And we did a really good job of setting the stage, getting the models, getting the paperwork together. And then I happened to meet Steve in a totally different construct. He was doing a webinar for something totally unrelated to that. We started talking, and he started tossing out all these questions, and we really were doing our best to get it right. And that's when I realized that there were so many things that we didn't know to even ask about when we were trying to really expand our footprint and our initiative into diverse models that show this correct dosing behavior. And so that's really how Steve and I started talking, and it was eye-opening to me, all the things that we hadn't considered about in our model shoot. Turned out okay, but definitely not the best it could have been, because we just didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah, no, and that was a great partnership and how it came together, because typically our clients wouldn't have taken it as far as you all did, and even there we were able to identify some gaps in how best to do the next shoots, and we came together, we did the next shoot, and it came out fantastic. It was a great partnership. Everyone was included, everyone was involved. And some of the things that we thought about, and we're not scientists, we learn from our clients and we do research, but in partnership with CHPA, they brought to the table how it should correctly look, eye level, how it should be, which instrument should be used, whether it's cups, whether it's a syringe, how to see if it's accurately done. And what we brought to the table was the production process. So we did everything from identifying, the models, what a family should look like, what the, based on the economic status and location, what should the location look like, right? So if you're trying to appeal to, people in the lower middle class or lower economic status, you don't have Viking stoves in the background, right? You don't have certain appliances that are not typically found in those places. And I'm not saying there aren't people who fit that, but if you look at what the dominant narrative would be, as it relates to communicating to, certain groups, you want to make sure that it's in line with what is true and accurate. And that is what we really did. We spent a lot of time researching and learning from CHPA and then training the models on how to, visually display this, on how to dose, how to store, and how to dispose of medicines properly, especially when dealing with younger people. And this image collection is on pocstock right now, and it's an amazing collection. So we're planning to do more in the future, and that partnership kind of brings together the best of our production process and picking out the diverse models and picking out the locations and really making sure it comes off as authentic. And also with CHPA's vast knowledge and partnership. So it was a great project, and it was a way to bring, an inclusive lens to this, because the people in front of the camera were diverse, the people behind the camera were diverse. And when I say diverse, it's not a substitute for people of color. I mean, we had, people of all races and genders and backgrounds at the table, lending their voice, their perspective, because we all, no matter who we are, where we come from, we all have something to contribute, and everyone was able to contribute. And it was a beautiful process, and it worked really well because we had so many voices at the table. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm going to go just a couple of quick action steps that we normally provide to our clients, especially when they're at the beginning of their process. There's a lot more to it. Like I said, this is just a primer. This is just an introduction. And anything beyond this point, we would probably have to sit with an individual team and kind of learn more about them and help them walk forward. But building your image library is a good recommendation that we have. Taking all of the stock imagery and all the custom imagery that you've ever had and putting it into a library and making it available to all your comms teams. And then we can do an assessment of that library to make sure that that your library is full of diverse content and you're including of different groups. It's better to have an image library for your organization of approved images that are already been purchased, licensed, and are sitting and waiting. Some of it is evergreen, and it can just be ready for when you need it, right? And when we do our audit, we're looking to see where the gaps are. Okay, your image library is 58% this or 2% that, or you're totally missing this group that you should be communicating to. And we'll help do a gap analysis to help you figure that out. Another thing is an editorial calendar. Most of you probably already have one, but you'll be surprised as to how many communicators don't have a calendar that spans at least 2 quarters, or if not a full year, of these are the communications that are going to go out. This is the messaging, this is the theme, and these are the imagery that are going to be accompanying those communications across social, across web, across whatever the case, right? And having an editorial calendar helps you to be more intentional, right? You can communicate to Hispanics not just in Hispanic Heritage Month. Like you can literally plan to your communication. So when you look at it at a glance, you can see, okay, we have a well-rounded communication strategy because we have this calendar that helps us know that in January, these are the hot topics, February, March, April, May, so on, so on, and so forth. So we can help provide imagery that aligns with your editorial calendar. The last point is having content guidelines. Now, every company is not always going to be as diversity and inclusion focused as others, and that's fine. But knowing what your guidelines are for your comms teams, knowing that these are the types of images that are allowed, these are the types of messaging that's allowed, and these are our comfortable parameters. This is where we can kind of push the boundaries a little bit and expand and grow. But these are comfortable parameters that all communications can go through. When you have an image library, editorial calendar, and clear content guidelines of what you will and won't post, and your team is trained and clear on those things, you can see more effective, consistent communications, right? Some of us know, Pride Month, everyone changes their logo and then they change it back and then they don't communicate to that community for the rest of the year, right? That community knows it and you'll get called out for it, right? So, and sometimes rightfully so. I'm not in the business of calling people out, but I've seen it happen. And, having this sort of three-prong strategy as a starting point helps to avoid those landmines. Lastly, one of the things as communicators, we want to know whether we're communicating effectively with our audiences. So engagement is one of the measurements of success. So if you're putting out content and you're getting engagement, it's authentic, you're including people, you're learning, you're adapting, you should see increases in your engagement across all channels. And as well as, dollars and cents at the end of the day. So these are things that we talk about, and, diversity is the lens in which we look at the world through. So if this is, let's say this is a starting point for you and you're looking to get started and do better over time, we have a full program that we work with one-on-one with brands and associations around. So we'd love to stay connected. I am a heavy LinkedIn user, so feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and connect with me. My email is here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have. And, thank you for listening, and hopefully we can engage.
Thank you, Steve. And please remember to type your questions in the chat. I see there's at least one that's coming in, but I wanted to ask you, because you talked about making sure that you're checking your content and materials on a periodic basis. Are there considerations that differ if you have something that is going to be static? Sorry, I'm in DC, so inevitably a siren is going off in the background when I take myself off mute. But are there certain considerations if something is going to be static versus something that you're going to be looking at on a routine basis and it's almost like an evergreen asset?
It really depends on the organization and how often they communicate. Every organization has a cadence, and you should always have evergreen content. Like you should always have, content that you change, monthly, quarterly. If it's on a print piece, then it's obviously not going to change as frequently as you can change your social media or your web content. But I think you should have a mix of both. Topical content that's changed pretty frequently, and then some evergreen content that represents the essence of your brand throughout the year. And you definitely have to give different thought to the evergreen content than you would to the more frequently updated content.
And so how do we know when we've hit the target? What are there metrics that we should look at? Is it checking, and I'm not a social media expert, but is it looking to see if we have some blowback from TikTok or Snapchat, or is it not getting calls to our front desk about how we did or didn't do something we should or should not have done? How do we know when we've gotten it right?
Yeah, I like to think about the opposite, not necessarily the blowback, but the engagement level. So I like to think about it on the opposite, not how many people are upset or how many people are, calling you out on social media, but the opposite. How many people are sharing, liking, commenting on your social media content? How many people are reaching out to you to say, I liked what you did there. I like what you said there. This is great. I referred you to a friend of mine. How many people can you convert to advocates and ambassadors of your brand and your messaging? The engagement was the last thing I said. And that's how I measure the success of this all. If you include more people and those people start to feel included and valued, then they'll start to show up. They'll start to engage with your brand, and you'll start to see that across your whole communication chain, especially in the digital space. How many people do you tell when you like something? Probably one or two, right? When you hate something, you tell everybody, so you have to sort of fight that fight and convert more people to loving your brand and embracing your messaging.
We'll take one more question, and somebody put this in the question piece, so I wasn't sure, Marcia, if you saw it, but the question was, how can you be sensitive and not overrepresenting diversity that does not exist in a membership organization? Great question.
Can you phrase that a little differently? I'm not
So
sure.
I think what they're asking is, I don't work for an association, but they're saying I work for an association where there's no diversity. Yet I want my association to move in that direction. And so I'm trying to get them to represent diversity in the images that they use, but our members are all white men over 50.
Sure. I mean, white men over 50 are people too, right? So and a lot of the groups, we work with a lot of creative and production teams, and most of them are all white teams. And the thing is just the willingness to learn, the willingness to say, okay, is there something else that we can learn from other people that are not part of the group, whether they're women, whether it's other racial groups. If you think about the example with how balanced your diet becomes when you try different foods, right? It's the same thing. If you want to learn more about, how to be more successful in your organization, then you need to include more voices. If not, you'll continuously have the same ideas, similar ideas that reinforce your current thinking, right? You're not getting anything that challenges what you think you know about the world. And across any measurable metrics, it's been proven over and over across Forbes, and everyone has reported that diverse teams and groups perform better than teams, when it's one siloed group, no matter what that group is made of. It could be 50-year-old white men, it could be all Black teams, it could be anytime you diversify the group, you bring diverse ideas to the table, diverse experiences, backgrounds, and that can only benefit the end result.
So we have one more question from Lucy. Lucy, I'm going to ask Steve to put his email in the chat for everybody. So if you have a question, and I'm sorry, Lucy, but we're 5 minutes over, and I really do like to end on time. And I appreciate everybody staying till the end and being interested in asking questions. But Lucy, Steve, well, if you can let Steve know your email, he can send you a response. Her question was, what about trying to get the best pictures of the person at the event? General marketing images are the one thing, but we try to really focus on our photography captured to best represent and speak to our members. It's a challenge. It's kind of similar to the other question that you just answered, Steve. But thank you everybody so much for sticking with us. We're on summer hiatus for the next couple months. We'll be back in September. Thank you, Marcia, for putting together a great program. And thanks very much to Steve for leading us through a really thought-inspiring program. Have a very happy 4th of July, everybody. See you in September. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you all.
Thanks to everyone for joining today.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.